Welcome to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, where research is meeting the real world. I'm Dr. Dion Stevens, a professor of psychology and co-author of the Psychology of Black Womanhood book. Today, we're diving into the fascinating shift in the beauty world, one that's not only about trends, but also representation, innovation, and real change. Over the past decade, the beauty industry has seen growing calls for inclusivity, clean ingredients, and science-backed products. Yet many mainstream brands still fall short when it comes to addressing the unique needs of Black women. Enter Spelman College's Cosmetic Science program. This isn't just a response to the market, it's a bold statement. Black women belong at the forefront of science, beauty, and innovation. In this program, students just don't learn about cosmetic chemistry and product formulation. They explore dermatology, cultural impact, and the social and economic forces shaping beauty standards. In this episode, we're exploring how Spelman is cultivating this next generation of leaders with Dr. Leyte Winfield, a distinguished professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Spelman College. She's also the division chair for the Natural Sciences and Mathematics program and director of the Cosmetic Science program. Dr. Winfield is a synthetic organic chemist with experience in academic, industrial, and military laboratories. Her efforts have been recognized by the American Association of Cancer Research, the Council for Undergraduate Research, and the National Institutes of Health. We see every day how deeply hair, skin, and other beauty practices are really woven into the daily lives and identities of us as Black women. But despite this cultural and sort of economic impact, there's been less attention given to the science behind our beauty. And that's why it was really interesting to me when I read about the Spelman Cosmetic Science program and the ways it's intentionally seeking to fill that gap. Can you describe how you came about creating this program?
So I can start by answering the question that you just posed or suggested in terms of the representation in the beauty market, and specifically that from the skilled, technical, scientific side. So we know practitioners, we know the individuals who are using the products to achieve a look, but we don't often see that same diversity when we think about the technical jobs, the research and development, the individuals who are bringing forth the cutting edge ideas in how we think about our skin, how we think about hair, how we think about ingredients, even thinking about with all of the new products that come out in a month or even in a week, what are we doing with the other products that we now no longer have use for? All of that is a part of cosmetic science. And then along those lines, you have the safety of braiding hair and the safety of hair straighteners and other products. You start to wonder about the impact of beauty, not just for its aesthetic benefit, but how is it really impacting our bodies and our lives? So from that lens, who are the experts in the science that drive innovations? We see a similar disparity to what we see for all of STEM. So we know that less than 2% of practicing scientists and engineers are Black women, right? When you look into the beauty industry, you see even more of a disparity. The numbers get smaller, which is counterintuitive, since when we think about cosmetics, many people immediately think woman. This is an industry that's woman driven, but it's actually an industry that's led by Caucasian males. And so the idea of cosmetic science and creating this program goes back to my first love, which is chemistry. And the reason why I became a chemist was because I was interested in how these things we use every day worked. I was interested in understanding how Dawn took the grease away, and if lotion really could help with ash, and I guess we call it dry skin now. In our community we just call it ash.
Yep.
How do we improve that? So I was really, really interested in lotion, and of course we all came up with concoctions for our hair. I've tried the eggs, I've tried the mayonnaise, I've tried the beer, and we've taken scientifically now what we know about the proteins and enzymes that are beneficial in those ingredients and how they impact our hair. That's been translated to some of the hair care products we have right now. But just leaning into that childhood aspiration, I immediately went to chemistry. I didn't end up in marketing. I didn't end up in some of these other spaces. So it was really a love of chemistry and a love of using that chemistry to create products that impact the way we live our lives. That was the inspiration for the program. And also remembering that when I was an undergraduate, there wasn't a defined pathway for doing this, for becoming a cosmetic scientist who worked in the lab. And I wanted to make sure that future generations knew the pathways, what they needed in terms of coursework, how do they network to get in this space, what different types of companies could use their skill set if they were interested in contributing to the beauty field as a scientist.
So you've given us a lot to unpack there. What I really like is how you set up the timeliness. Why is this intersection of science and identity so critical now? And how does the program at Spelman address this intersecting moment?
Wow. When we released the first component of the Cosmetic Science program, it was the Spelman online certificate. That was released, I believe, in 2019. So 2018 is when we did a lot of the legwork around that. And you recall then DEI efforts were, I wouldn't say taking shape, but they were really dictating how we moved in various spaces.
Yeah.
That was also around the time with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter. And there was just in our community, and when I say community, the US population as a whole was asking the questions about diversity, equity, inclusion, respect, justice. Within that space, I was focused on the cosmetics, initially looking to pursue my passion. At the same time, I'm also a DEI researcher, right? So I was working on a lot of projects related to the DEI for the American Chemical Society. So the identity aspect of cosmetics, it was just a nice merger. But during that time, Spelman decided that they would get into adult education, different ways of credentialing, different ways of providing skill sets to the broader community beyond our traditional students.
Right.
So it was opportunity that met the moment in time where we were. What I found interesting, the response to just a certificate for me, naively, was unexpected. When I started working on the undergraduate program, that positive response almost tripled, right? And so you learn pretty soon that there's a void here, and it's not a trivial void.
Right.
So we talk about beauty, and people immediately think it's vanity, and it's just aesthetics, and it's just decorative. But even aesthetically, if you're a person who has a skin condition, whether it's hyperpigmentation or hypopigmentation, you know that that could cause you to be self-conscious about how you present yourself.
Absolutely.
So it can really impact how people engage in everyday lives. The products we're providing dictate really how you show up and whether or not you feel good about yourself for yourself first, and then if you feel good about how you present yourself to others.
So can you describe a little bit about what's being covered in this program?
So I can talk about both the Spelman certificate and the Cosmetic Science program. I was excited to start with the Spelman certificate because I was able to try out curriculum and to see how the community responded. So Spelman was created so that you don't have to have any prerequisite knowledge. Okay. You just need a high school diploma. So with that, in the foundations course for the Cosmetic Science program, we do review a little bit of general chemistry, a little bit of general biology, just so individuals understand things like solubility and attractive forces, as well as anatomy of the hair and skin. Then we started layering in conversations around how do you formulate for color, how do you formulate for fragrance, and formulation for hair and skin. So they get all of that in one 8-week course. And that's the Foundations of Cosmetics course in the East Spelman. We also in that course talk about definitions of beauty. So we go from European standards, then African standards, African American standards, what informs those standards, and how other people are responding to them. So we watch a lot of TED Talks with people talking about beauty and why grooming hair is such a cornerstone of beauty in the African American community. And so they can dig into all of this information and start to formulate their own interpretation of what beauty means to them.
So how do the E students then differ from the undergrad students?
So the East Spelman students are all adults.
Okay.
Typically, they're not enrolled in an undergraduate program. So our Spelman undergrads cannot enroll in the East Spelman course. Okay. So it's outward facing. It targets non-traditional populations. We have had individuals from industry who just want to sharpen their skill set, or maybe they're in hair, but they want to learn a little bit about skin because they want to switch projects. So that's one demographic. We do have a large number of cosmetologists and estheticians who want to add to that license. Either they're thinking about launching a line or they have already launched a line. We have entrepreneurs who just want to better communicate with their chemist and understand what has been formulated for them and why things were necessary, like solvents or preservatives is the big one. And how do I know if this is clean versus not clean? Why do I have to use alcohol? So we try to address those questions in that foundations course. There's also a foundations laboratory course, and this is where they get to actually create formulas for hair, skin. And we only do hair and skin in that course because we also have a course called Natural Products and Fragrance. And in that course, they talk about how do you extract essential oils from either the fruit, the seed, the stem, the leaf, because we can use all parts of the plant to get some of those aromas that we're associated with. There's also a course on toxicology, right? So there's this big shift in the field right now because the FDA came out with their Modernization Act of cosmetics. So we do introduce them to toxicology and regulations for cosmetics, specifically focusing on the US, but they do a little comparing with the EU and the UK. The other course that we have is a color cosmetics course because, of course, this would not be complete if we didn't talk about the decorative aspects of it. So it's a 4-course sequence for them to get the certificate. You have to take the foundations course and the lab course, but then you can pick 2 other electives to round that out. On the undergraduate side, we built on the chemistry curriculum. So it's a lab-based focus. And so we have a cosmetic chemistry concentration. So essentially a chemistry major, but you're focusing on cosmetic science. So your upper level courses are the cosmetic science courses. There's a cosmetic formulations course that is lab-based where they learn to actually create these formulas similar to the online program, but of course they're in person with us and get to use industry grade instruments in order to analyze the formulations that they're creating. We also have a natural products course, an oil and fragrance laboratory that goes along with the natural products course. So they get much more content just because we have a full semester and we split that course into 2. The theory and the lab, so they get way more content than they would get in the East Spelman course. And then there's also a hair science course where they get to work on research projects related to curly hair or ethnic hair and really round out their understanding of cosmetics. They also have courses like the psychology of beauty that sits in the psychology department. There is a entrepreneurship of beauty that's in economics. And then we're working on kind of a rhetoric course related to cosmetics, and that will be situated in the English department. So we wanted to be interdisciplinary. But with that, we have a minor in cosmetic science, and this is for those individuals who are not STEM majors. So it's not lab heavy, but it really wants them to have at least up to the cosmetic chemistry part. And then they compare that with whatever they're studying so that it is an add-on to the degree. So we have a number of health science students who are doing this. We have a number of women's studies students, a number of entrepreneurship students who are in this space. So we have a really wide range of students who have taken advantage of that minor.
Obviously, this is at Spelman, and there's an assumption that it's going to focus on Black women or people of color, the types of content you're focusing on. But beyond that, could you describe the ways in which these courses, or even the way it's set up, is unique from other cosmetic sciences programs at predominantly white institutions, specifically in terms of thinking about the unique biologic considerations for Black women that mainstream beauty science often overlooks?
I will start by saying that there are only 2 undergraduate institutions in the country who have a cosmetic science program.
Wow.
Spelman, so we're the second, and then the University of Toledo. And then the difference between the 2 of us, the program at the University of Toledo is actually in the College of Pharmacy. So we're the only program at a primarily undergraduate institution. With that, we teach the basic principles of formulation. So our students can formulate for any demographic. But we do have a course called Survey of Beauty where, again, we've kind of taken things out of that foundations course, given it its own space so we can fully unpack it. And we go through that conversation about what is beauty to you? How do we define beauty practices? Where do they come from? How does the popular media fill in those gaps? We ask questions about sustainability. And because we are women's college, we can see things in our eyes and talk about things with our voice. And so that brings in the uniqueness of being at Spelman. I have students who are all taking African diaspora in the world. They bring that experience to the course.
Right.
They want to know, as I stated earlier, how these products are impacting my body. Is there a public health concern? How are these products impacting my environment? Is this recyclable? Can we take materials that people haven't considered and upregulate those and translate them into some needed ingredient so that we can kind of help with the waste? So my students are unique in that when they think about cosmetic science, those are the questions that they're asking.
So you've talked about the importance of training these students and opening up more inclusivity in terms of research. What does research equity for you look like then in the field of beauty science?
That is an important question. The easiest way for me to address that is to share a story. I started working on expanding my network by going to regional meetings and going to suppliers days, which are meetings where everybody comes together, getting my face out there, getting the information out there that we have this program at Spelman. I went to one meeting, which was focused on ethnic hair. I was so excited about this meeting, 3-day meeting. And the meeting was held by an organization that was started by a Caucasian man from the UK. The company is ran by a Caucasian man from the UK. And the meeting was organized by a Caucasian man from the UK.
I know where this is going.
And they do amazing work.
Yeah.
Have set the protocols for how we think about hair, how we test, how we do claims validation. They do amazing work. But as they talked about the results, my ear heard the problem with Black people in their hair.
Right.
They were trying to fix the problem. And questions were asked like, well, why don't they wash their hair more often? Why do they wear scarves to bed? Why do they do protective hairstyles? While I understand they were trying to figure out the source of the scalp issue or the source of the breakage, there's a way that question would be asked if it's asked at a Spelman that differs from how it was asked and responded to in that space.
Right.
So it's bringing that culturally relevant and culturally appropriate viewpoint to the conversation. It's
Right.
bringing my experience to the conversation, my needs, my interest, the way I live, my habits, and not saying that they're a problem, but but helping me understand how to live better within my norms.
Right.
We have an opportunity through this program to create people who can contribute to this conversation from a broader perspective than it's currently being given. That is so important, especially if you think about how much money our community spends in the beauty industry.
Absolutely.
Think about the questions or the issues we still need to have addressed by the products that we have access to. If we're not at the table, I don't know how we move the needle on making sure we have the information we desire.
The example you just gave reminds me of all the debates that are happening, particularly in social media, of who owns the companies and the products that are being sold, and the whole debate that happened with one product that was bought by a corporation from a Black woman, and it started ruining Black women's hair. And I think it goes back to an example of scientific progress, but it still can be exclusionary. Can you give us examples how this program at Spelman is reframing what is seen as healthy and normal?
So one of the things we do, we have something called the Black Beauty Stimulus Summit.
Right.
This is where we bring everyone together, specifically the technical experts, along with anybody else who wants to attend, to talk about what are the innovations, where do we fit, what historically have been some of the claims that we try to target, how are we best targeting those claims. So this year we talked about the impact of consumer products on the community. We had a speaker from Harvard University's School of Public Health who was our keynote. She talked about her research related to how products that have endocrine disruptors are causing early onset of menstrual cycles, causing issues with fetus development, as well as other maternal health. Things that you want a scientist to consider, or even a formulator to consider, before they go in the lab and create something. So how do we have answers for those concerns before we start to formulate and still give consumers the payoff that they want from the product?
Right.
We dealt with that. And around that, we dealt with sustainability. There was an individual who came in and talked about her innovation using banana trees to create synthetic hair fibers. You're doing the synthetic fiber with something that's biodegradable that should be easier on your scalp. We talked about the history of hair care in Atlanta. So we had James Bronner from Bronner Brothers and Cornell McBride from Design Essentials, and talked about the history of their families and really ushering in this Black hair care market, specifically in Atlanta, and what their hopes are for the future. There was a nurse that came in, and this is a question I received some time ago about how companies are thinking about individuals with different health conditions who might need a different type of formulated product. And this nurse, she's from Dillard University, she talked about taking care of patients' hands when they have things like diabetes or other long-term illnesses or even terminal illnesses, how they need a different type of care and a different type of product, and what she's able to see as she's caring for these patients and their nails. We talked about the impact of the environment on our hairs. That was a pretty cool talk named Clouded with a Chance of Buildup. And then we did bring in Tristan, who owned Bevel, and he was talking very candidly about what it meant for him to be an indie brand who got bought by a larger company and why that was the right decision for him. He talked about knowing when to sell and how selling helps us close that whole economic gap, not just for himself, but the entire Black community, and really encourage the audience to be open to these ways of creating wealth for the Black community. While the concerns might need to be addressed, they also should not, vilify those individuals who decide to sell their companies to larger corporations. And it's also about getting more market awareness for our brands and our hair care needs. So That was a very rich conversation. So we moved in and out of history and entrepreneurship. We moved through environments, and we moved through other public health concerns. We also talk about formulations, and we talked about why we still aren't quite where we want to be as it relates to the colors and foundations, and how far we still need to go in that space.
Did you talk about emerging technologies like AI skincare analysis or personalized beauty? And how are these tying into the beauty of science?
Absolutely. We did two things. One was really cool. Our presenter did a color matching demonstration in the room on the stage, and talked about how they're using AI to help them to redefine the color scale, especially considering the undertones in our skin. The whole focus there was it's not just the color, because we can match the color, but sometimes the gray cast or the ashiness that we'll see is because the undertone isn't right. So talked about how they're using various types of skin scans to actually know what the undertone is and how to actually combine then the right colors to not only match the skin, but to also complement the undertone. The other talk was focused on the hair. We had Candace Mitchell from Myavana, who's also located in Atlanta, Georgia. She has a skin science company, and her company has a scope which allows her to scan your scalp or analyze your hair follicles and tell you exactly the regimen of hair care that you need for your specific scalp and skin. And she says, we've been trained that there's a very narrow description of hair based on the Walker system, where your hair goes from 1A to 4C, right? But her company considers that our hair is actually as unique as our fingerprint. And there's multiple textures on your head.
Right.
And so she demonstrated for us and allowed a couple people to get scope at the event how she's using AI and other technologies to understand scalp health, hair condition, and match that with all of the products that are available on the market. So she's brand agnostic. So you may get a shampoo from Paul Mitchell and a mousse from Design Essentials. She's going to match those ingredients that will work best for your hair type. She has all this experimental data that she's fed into her system, and now she can use AI to quickly search that data and give you recommendations for your hair. We actually had a technologist who's created this machine, and I thought it was so cool. It looks like a Keurig, right? So can you imagine taking Candace's invention, her Myavana scope, being able to scope your hair at home, and then having this Keurig machine that combines the right ingredients for you right on your countertop for whatever hair day you're having that day.
How far along is that innovation?
We saw a prototype last year. It is being prototyped for store use in the UK. So she's showing some of that data on LinkedIn at the moment.
Excellent. What I really like about what you're talking about here is that beauty science, in terms of how it's being framed through this Spelman Cosmetic Science program, it's not just about being inclusive, but also affirming, which I think is a unique piece in terms of how you're being interdisciplinary, how you're tying in history and society, and even framing it not just as a global issue, but like how you're tying it into local Atlanta culture. And so I'm wondering, what's next then for the program?
I'm open to the possibilities. We are hoping to work towards having an independent major, one that allows us to explore more of the interdisciplinary information that you've mentioned. The chemistry curriculum is packed. It's a very dense curriculum. There's not a lot of movement that would allow for us to bring in color theory from an arts perspective, or the history of makeup creation and design. We want to have that as a part of the program. And so the major will allow us the flexibility to reduce some of the heavy science courses and bring in courses from the humanities, the social sciences, and the arts to give a more rounded curriculum.
So if somebody wanted to find out more about the program, particularly people who are not at Spelman, how do they go about finding out more?
Absolutely. Just go to the Spelman website, which is spelman.edu. You'll find links to East Spelman there, as well as to the Cosmetic Science program.
That was Dr. Leyte Winfield, a distinguished professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Spelman College, where she's also director of the Cosmetic Science program. To explore more of Dr. Winfield's work, including getting more details about the Cosmetic Science program, visit this page on the Psychology of Black Womanhood website. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. We've got some amazing guests lined up for upcoming shows, but if you have an episode idea, reach out and let us know. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a rating and review, or visit our website at www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. Again, thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune into our next episode in 2 weeks, when we'll be centering even more research in the real world.